Right, let's get some reaction then and views on the issue of reopening of schools on Monday. We're now joined via Zoom by the South African Federation of Trade Unions spokesperson, Mr. Trevor Shaku. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thanks so very much for availing yourself to SABC News this afternoon.
Thanks for having us, Flo, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Yeah. Trevor, the Education Minister said that it's all systems go on her side when it comes to the reopening of schools for next week, or for this Monday. Talk to us about your views on the issue of learners going back to school.
Sis Flo, there's a need indeed, given the fact that NIDSCRAM study has revealed that the learners in this country since last year have lost 70 to 100% of their teaching time, academic time.
Yeah.
But most importantly, that also 54% of their learning time has also been lost. So that is a basis for which we would argue that schools should reopen.
Yeah.
However, at the current moment, because of the government, in the morning they presented that they are ready, but we know as a matter of fact that the Department of Education, with those water tanks it has promised since last year, with the mobile classes it has promised last year, with topping up of the school learning and teaching material, which it has promised last year. Those things which they have said that they are ready and indicated that they are ready have been a promise to schools for the past year, and schools have not received that. So the readiness is really questionable. And given the fact that this thing that young people are not susceptible to or prone to transmission has been proved to be a fallacy, because many learners before the closure of schools had contracted COVID-19, but also 6, for instance, in Free State had already passed on because of COVID-19. That showed that the transmission amongst young people was real, and therefore the readiness of government in as far as things stand in terms of overcrowding of classes, because their aim is to ensure that they return to 100% capacity, especially from grade 1 to grade 7. And of course, other grades had already returned 100% before the closure of term 2. So that, in total sum, shows that there are discrepancies with the plan that government has presented to declare that it's ready.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure as a federation, as a union, your biggest concern would, of course, be then the issue of working conditions, and then we'd have to then zoom in on teachers. There have been some glitches when it comes to the vaccination program, and I'm sure this is something that you've really been speaking out on in terms of teachers getting vaccinated. Where are we now, and are some of those glitches, hiccups, have you overcome them? And in terms of readiness of teachers themselves, when we're talking about the vaccine drive, is there readiness if we're looking at that?
According to the report I saw midweek, it showed that there were at least about more than 500,000 teachers who had been vaccinated, and maybe there was roughly just over 600,000 who had not been vaccinated. So as far as that is concerned, we applaud for ensuring that, and also the unions which had encouraged teachers to vaccinate. And this for us actually is an issue, because we think because of the transmission, the possibility of transmission of COVID-19 amongst young people, we think that this particular rollout program of vaccination should not only be limited to teachers. If we are to really save lives in the education sector and the schooling system, and ensure that even those learners who are young are at that moment able to be safe, because we know as a matter of fact the overcrowding, which is obviously a fact in the country, because government has been plowing on the money meant for infrastructure grant. It has cut 2 billion from the infrastructure grant for schooling. So as a matter of fact, we know that there are 54 and schools with classrooms which have more than 60 learners in classrooms, more than 50, and others even more than 70.
Yeah.
So that indicates that there is indeed there's going to be a stampede in the classrooms as usual, like under normal circumstances. And therefore, the only thing that could assist in this instance is not only to ensure that teachers are vaccinated, but to ensure that even the learners are put on the vaccination program. But government is, of course, not even planning to vaccinate learners because theirs is to achieve herd immunity amongst the adult population, which certainly excludes the young people. And we know, as a matter of fact, because they are prone to transmission, they are going to really, we might even see sparks in a number of COVID-19 infections as soon as schools reopen to full capacity.
I mean, earlier on in our conversation, you had actually indicated that there were some things that were not ready. You actually indicated the issue of mobile classes that aren't ready. And I see it is an issue for you because you've raised it again now when you're saying that, there's going to be, some sort of stampede in classes in terms of overcrowding. If you're saying that you believe that schools should then be reopened on Monday, but there's this underlying issue, and it's actually quite a big issue, at which point do you think that this issue should then be sorted out and resolved so that we are indeed paying attention to the safety of teachers in classrooms and in schools?
The unfortunate part is that the issue of infrastructure would not be resolved now, not even tomorrow. It would take some time, but the blame squarely lies with the ANC government because the austerity cuts which have been pursued in all the various departments of government have actually, and especially in education department, because the education department is in shambles. And this question of the infrastructure development is one, but part of a whole set of things which are not being done right by the Department of Education, but also because of austerity measures which have been imposed by Treasury on the government expenditure on public goods and services. So as a matter of fact, whilst we recognize indeed that the schools really need to open because the learners are losing a teaching time, actually part of the study which Amnesty International and I think NITSCREM also had conducted showed that it would take the learner who is in grade 3 in June 2021 has in comparison, similar learning outcomes as a learner who was in grade 2 in January 2019. So that shows you that the loss of teaching and learning time has actually affected learners. But to push that schools must open because we have reached peak and numbers are beginning to drop, whereas there are not even measures. And we know that the Department of Education, whatever it promises us and promised teachers and learners, it would not simply fulfill. It has not fulfilled it last year because the issue of mobile classes, we should not even be speaking about mobile classes at this current moment because this is what they promised us last year. Part of the 14 non-negotiables, which unions had put forth in April, May, during the negotiations prior to the reopening of schools in June, was that there should be running water in every school, and that the schools which do not have fiscal enough infrastructure must at least be afforded the mobile classes so that they can be able to divide learners into smaller numbers into these particular classes. That has not been addressed. This is the very reason why they are mentioning it in their program today, because they've not addressed it last year. So that issue of infrastructure would continue to haunt the education sector and even the learning of these learners, our children in schools, because for the most part, the stampede and overcrowding of classes in most instances, and you can go to each and every teacher, they will tell you that overcrowding in classes eventually disturbs the very proper way in which schooling must take place, because there are various disruptions. You cannot manage the class properly. So even beyond COVID-19, infrastructure problem is a thorn in the schooling education of the country, but most importantly, it has tangible negative impact on the learning
I can imagine, Mr. Shaku. I mean, we've been hearing about, even schools bearing the brunt of some of the unrest that we experienced the past couple of days in the country. I mean, we heard of many schools, even in KZN, that had been vandalized, and I wonder how much of an effect that would then have on the infrastructure issues that you're already talking about that are ailing in terms of learners going back to school. I mean, does that also, in fact, cause more problems to where there is already a problem?
Yes, I saw that. And sadly, schools have been vandalized or victim of various community protests. And it was not also surprising to hear that there are additional schools which have suffered from the recent riots. And that will just create, of course, further stress or put further stress on the education system, especially on the ability of schools to be able to give learners a decent shelter for learning and teaching. But most importantly, this will also affect learners to continually lose part of the teaching time, because even though the Deputy Director General of the Department of Basic Education has promised that they had begun already with ensuring that those schools will be ready for Monday, we should doubt that, because there's nothing that really, for the most part, that they've been saying which they are fulfilling. If you go to these schools in a week's time or in a month's time, you'll realize that that particular problem of infrastructure damage because of the riots has not been addressed. And certainly we have that kind of a department which merely puts these things for record on media so that they can sound better without really dealing with them concretely and to the best fulfillment and accommodation of learners and teachers in adequate and proper shelter.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us your time and indeed giving us a full picture of what's going on in terms of schooling. And we certainly await to hear the President's address tomorrow as to whether or not the learners will be returning to school on Monday. Thank you, sir.